Let's enjoy the little things in life together. A new day, a new vibe. Welcome to my channel, Daily Top Vibes. Biography and Early Life. Born. Der 5. Dezember 1782 in Kinderhook, New York. Parents: Abraham Van Buren, farmer and tavern keeper, and Maria Hose Van Alen. He was of Dutch descent. Education and early work. He attended village school, later Kinderhook Academy. At about age 15, he apprenticed with a lawyer, Francis Sylvester, and participated in court cases. He later studied law in New York City and entered legal practice around 1803. Marriage and family. In 1807, he married Hannah Hose, his cousin on his mother's side. They had several children. Hannah died in 1819, and Van Buren never remarried. Political career and presidency. Political beginnings. Served in New York politics, including the New York State Senate. Was part of factional politics, Albany Regency, which gave him strong influence in the Democratic Republican and later Democratic Party. National offices. U.S. Senator from New York, 1,821. 1,828. Governor of New York briefly in 1828 before moving to federal posts. Secretary of State under Andrew Jackson, 1,829. 1,831. Vice President under Andrew Jackson, 1833. Presidency, 1,837. 1,841. He became the 8th President of the U.S., starting the 4th of March 1837. His presidency was immediately challenged by the Panic of 1837, a major financial crisis. He proposed and worked to establish an independent treasury system to manage federal funds instead of relying on banks. He also faced controversies over policies related to slavery. For example, he opposed immediate annexation of Texas, partly because of its slavery implications, and conflicts like the Second Seminole War. He was defeated in his re-election bid in 1840 by the Whig candidate William Henry Harrison. Later life and death. After presidency, he remained active in politics. For example, ran under Free Soil Party in 1848. He died on the 24th of July, 1862, at his Lindenwold estate in Kinderhook. Historical significance. Founder of the Democratic Party. Van Buren played a central role in organizing the Democratic Party as a national political force. Little magician. Political skills. Known as a very skilled politician, good at party organization and political strategy. Economic challenge. His term is often judged by how he handled the Panic of 1837. Many historians think his response prolonged the economic distress. Others credit his push for independent treasury as a forward-looking reform. Net worth dividido por wealth estimates. Determining the net worth of someone from the 19th century is tricky. There's inflation, property values, debts, etc. But there are several estimates and pieces of data. Multiple sources estimate his peak net worth, adjusted for inflation to modern equivalents, to be in the range of US $25 to 30 million or more, depending on the method. For example, MoneyWise lists his estimated peak net worth at around US $29.7 million. The Atlantic estimates him at US $26 million. Much of his wealth came from his work as a lawyer, land ownership, including his estate Lindenwold in New York, investments, farming income from his property. One piece of evidence. In his later years, like 1859, 1861, Van Buren's farm, Lindenwold, produced income, for example, in 1859, about US $1,840.74 worth of produce was sold. After expenses and partner splits, his net income from that farming was smaller. This shows that while he had wealth in land divided by property, annual income from those holdings was modest. Martin Van Buren was born in the rural town of Kinderhook, New York, on the 5th of December 1782. His father, Abraham, owned a successful inn and small farm. The Van Buren Tavern served as a hub of social activity for the town, and the constant coming and goings of travelers between New York City and the state capital of Albany brought young Martin into contact with all sorts of people, both free and enslaved. In 1807, Martin married Hannah Hose, and the two had 5 children. But Hannah tragically died in 1819, long before Van Buren ascended to the presidency. Van Buren studied law and quickly became immersed in New York politics. He rose rapidly through the ranks of the Democratic-Republican Party and became the leader of the Bucktail faction. In 1821, the state legislature elected Van Buren to represent New York in the United States Senate, where he served until he resigned to become the governor of New York. He held this office briefly before accepting the position of Secretary of State for President Andrew Jackson. Van Buren's political ascent continued when he sided with President Jackson, Secretary of War John Eaton, and Eaton's wife Margaret during the scandalous Petticoat Affair. As the president's relationship with Vice President John C. Calhoun deteriorated, Jackson asked Van Buren to serve as the U.S. Minister to the United Kingdom. During Van Buren's confirmation hearing in the Senate, Vice President Calhoun delivered the decisive nay vote, confident that it would destroy Van Buren's career and sabotage his political ambitions. Instead, the episode brought Van Buren closer to Jackson and elevated his reputation among Democrats. President Jackson asked him to join the 1,832 ticket as his vice president, and after Jackson's re-election, Van Buren became one of the president's closest advisors and confidants. When Jackson decided not to run for a third term, Vice President Van Buren was the natural choice to succeed him. Van Buren's strong support of Jackson's agenda, along with his northern roots, gave him broader appeal to the electorate, and he defeated a crowded field of candidates in 1836. He became the first president to use the term slavery in an inaugural address, affirming his support for the institution. As president, Van Buren continued many of his predecessors' policies, including the forcible removal of thousands of Native Americans from their lands. His administration's involvement in the United States v. Amistad case on behalf of the Spanish government was viewed as a defense of slavery, though it lost the case at the United States Supreme Court. He did draw a sharp contrast to Jackson on the issue of Texas, as Van Buren believed annexation of a territory that permitted slavery would incite political discord and likely instigate a war with Mexico. During his time in the White House, President Van Buren relied upon free and enslaved African Americans to operate and maintain the president's house. This mix of staff was not unusual, as many of his predecessors had done the same, and Van Buren himself had previously used both free and enslaved labor at Decatur House while he served as Secretary of State. However, more attention was paid to his household expenditures rather than who was working in his house. The Panic of 1837 was one of the worst economic depressions in the young country's history. As a result, critics accused the president of living lavishly while ordinary Americans struggled to make ends meet. This perception and the running of a popular war hero in William Henry Harrison contributed to Van Buren's defeat in his re-election campaign. In 1844, Van Buren was poised to reclaim leadership of the Democratic Party, but his opposition to the annexation of Texas ultimately hurt him with Southern delegates and those that favored westward expansion. Van Buren made one more attempt to return to the White House in 1848 as the presidential candidate for the Free Soil Party, a party that was formed to oppose the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. Major General Zachary Taylor ultimately won the 1848 election, and Van Buren never ran for political office again. The former president lived out the rest of his life at Lindenwold, where he died on the 24th of July, 1862. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe with the bell icon.